Question dealing with the topic of Iran. What steps do you believe that the Congress and/or the Obama administration should take to ensure that Iran does not acquire the ability to develop a nuclear weapon? Mrs. Schakowsky.
I know the question will come up, because I'm going to first talk about sanctions and how they're working, whether or not military option is on the table, and I want to say, of course, it is, always, and the President has announced that it is there. But I am hopeful, and I want to give you some examples of how the sanctions have been working. Russia announced last week that it will return Iran's down payment of the S-300 air defense system because it's contrary to U.S. sanctions. Tough sanctions have slowed Iran's most prestigious economic project, the South Stars natural gas field, expected to bring in over $130 billion in sales after completion. Many countries now have pulled out. I'll give you more examples. Shell, Total, that's a French company, Halliburton, pulled out of development, threatened by tougher penalties for continuing to support the energy sector. I literally have all these pages of amazing examples of how the countries around the world are following the sanctions. You know that after the United States, that we helped get the United Nations, the European Union, Australia, Japan, South Korea. But these are not just words. There are examples of many ways that they have done that. Let me give you a few. Germany, Hungary, Australia, they're all part of the gas pipeline company. They announced they're not going to move forward with plans to use Iranian natural gas. Lloyd's of London said that they will not insure any of the vessels that go to Iran with petroleum. This is a big deal. Anyway, and on and on. Thank you.
Mr. Pollak.
I believe we need to learn from our history, from what has worked in the past when we have faced tyranny. We have two presidents who have stared down tyranny and succeeded. One was Roosevelt and the other was Reagan. Reagan understood you needed a twofold approach to defeat the Soviet Union. The first was military confrontation in the event the Soviets crossed a red line. They knew what would happen if they did. That's why the military option, and by the way, there are a range of military options, including cyber warfare, which may have already started. Those need to be on the table as options for the United States and for our allies. But there's another side to that equation, and Reagan understood that as well, which is support for human rights and democracy in Iran. We ought to have been much more outspoken when the ordinary people of Iran marched in the streets against their regime. We might have resolved this crisis without firing a shot if we could have sided with the people in the streets who were prepared to bring down their government. Now, where does Roosevelt come in? Roosevelt was warning as early as 1937 that we had to, in his words, quarantine the aggressor. That didn't just mean sanctions, and he knew that sanctions would be limited, because trade with Hitler's Germany was already limited, and Hitler's response was simply to invade his neighbors. When he ran out of gold in Austria, he moved into Czechoslovakia. When he ran out of gold in Czechoslovakia, he moved into Poland. And we know how that went. Sanctions are limited, and Iran is already evading them. Roosevelt said, quarantine the aggressors. And later in 1941, most importantly, he said, do not mistake the word of the dictators, for whom international law is a one-way street. That's what Iran is doing now at the UN. They vote to condemn Israel. They lead on issues like the Goldstone Report. It's a debasement of the ideals of the UN. We ought to put Iran in the dock and its allies and prosecute them in the court of world opinion and say, we stand against you, we are going to quarantine you, we stand on the side of democracy and human rights, and you will not last.
Thank you, Mr. Seals.
You know, it's true, the United Nations has a remarkable history of turning a blind eye to the needs of Israel. And so the fact that we were actually able to get sanctions passed through is quite an accomplishment. A symbolic one, to be sure, but an accomplishment nonetheless. I think it was the right step to follow up with our own sanctions bill, and they need to be fully implemented to have the full effect that they should. And as has been pointed out, we're seeing companies across the world, and indeed countries as well, pull back from Iran. Iran, as you all know, sits on a remarkable supply of oil, but cannot refine it into gas. And so they're dependent on the outside world to get their gasoline. So I think sanctions are the right first step, but not the last one. The next step is to try to pull China and Russia away from Iran. These two countries have thrown a lifeline to them, economic deals that will help Iran survive the pressure that we're putting on them now. So we should use our leverage with these two countries to try to sever those ties, to pull them away, to further isolate and put pressure on Iran. As for the military option, of course we keep it on the table. It's what will make our diplomacy that much more effective so that we can get results. It's worth noting, by the way, that if all of these other efforts don't fail, and we do have to pursue the military option, we want to be able to say that we tried absolutely everything we could, and we have been left with no other choice. That will make it easier to bring world opinion behind us to make sure that we can move through and beyond it as quickly and effectively as possible.